Good to be with you again. I'm going to try to finish a little earlier tonight. We'll see if we can do it. Sometimes when I say that, and then I wish I hadn't said it, but I'm really going to try to do that tonight. We started talking last night about mistakes to avoid. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to make mistakes. We just are. You know, there's lots of things that go on in 24 hours in a home, catastrophes, joys, sudden things, difficulties and stuff. We're going to make mistakes, but as we said, God made children resilient. And one of the things to do when we make a mistake is not to pretend to our children that we didn't make a mistake. You know, when they see mom and dad growing, when they see mom and dad apologizing when they need to, that sets a powerful example for them. But as we make mistakes, we don't want to keep making that same mistake. And so last night we looked at number one, failing to discipline. The Bible, of course, says that out of love we should discipline diligently. There's a number of verses we went over last night. If you want to go back and listen to them if you didn't hear them, or go through Proverbs and read these, there's a lot of verses on that, and there's a lot of people that make mistake number one, they just don't discipline. And sometimes they think they're doing their children a favor. No, children need love. Children need security. Children need joy. Children need comfort. They need to feel in a safe place. And part of that is training them how to be human beings and how to be good human beings and ready to serve God as they get older. And that's going to require some discipline. We talked about the mistake of rewarding misbehavior. When a child throws a tantrum, he should never, ever, ever get what he was throwing a tantrum to get. Don't put up with tantrums. Don't reward tantrums. Don't expect misbehavior. We're not talking about wanting misbehavior. Nobody wants it or hopes for it. But sometimes parents give up and they just decide, oh, he's going to act like that. Well, that little guy needs to be trained. And if I haven't figured out how to get that 5-year-old to behave differently, think about it, pray about it, get some advice from some other parents, but be the adult and don't give up on him, because you're the one that he's got to help him get out of that. And so that brings us to this chart, and we'll pick up here tonight. On expectations, as a general rule, you get what you expect. Now, there's a point at which our children, we start having less influence on them. Remember the proverb that we looked at last night, discipline your son while there is hope. Don't desire his death. And we gave the example of working with pottery. There's a time when you can really work with it easily. And there's a time when it starts getting set and you can't mold it much anymore. But when they're young, if you expect tantrums, you'll get them. If you expect dishonesty, you'll get it. If you expect bad attitudes, you will get it. But if you really expect the opposite and require and train for the opposite, you will get the opposite if you expect it. Now, I'm going to give an analogy here, not that you should treat your children like the guy does at a Marine camp, but if you remember back, and I don't know how they do it now, but years ago at Paris Island at the Marine base there, if you've ever seen a movie with things, and again, I'm not saying do your children like this, I'm just making a point about expectations. There's that drill sergeant, and when that bus pulls up and these new recruits get off the bus, does he think that they already do push-ups to his satisfaction, already make a bed to his satisfaction, already follow orders to his satisfaction? He doesn't think that at all. But why will they be doing that within a few weeks? Because he expects it. That's what I'm talking about. I don't mean, you know, my child did something bad. I never expected that. No, they're going to do some dumb things. But when you expect, no, that's not how we're going to behave. You know, and that's not the child you're going to be, and that's not the kind of grown-up you're going to be. And we're going to train you out of that. Expect better and get better. That brings us to number 4, failing to be consistent. And my guess is that every one of us as parents has sometime failed to be consistent. It's a challenge to be consistent, but it's a value. He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Not disciplines him occasionally, not disciplines him when he's in a good mood, not disciplines him when he has time to deal with it that day. It's discipline them diligently. That means on the day when you feel like it and on the day when you don't. On the day when you don't have a lot of time, when you have a lot of time, and on the day when you don't. Be consistent. Child psychologists, and some of them don't know what they're talking about, but one that did, he talked about how children are like little gamblers. And, you know, a gambler, all he needs is a chance that it's going to win. Do y'all have the lottery here in Tennessee? So, yeah, we do up in Pennsylvania too. And yeah, they say it benefits, you know, senior Pennsylvanians. Okay, but that's not why people play. They play because they want to win. And I asked the guy down at the convenience store near me, I said, how much does average lottery, you know, because I see him in line in front of me buying tickets, how much do they spend usually on average? He said about $50 a week. That's a lot of money, $50 a week. Now I want to ask you a question. Think about this in your mind. The fella standing in front of you buying $50 worth of lottery tickets, does he think that tonight he's going to win the big jackpot? No. He hopes, but he doesn't think he will, because he spent that money last week and the week before and the week before and the week before. So why is he doing it even though he doesn't think he is going to win tonight? Because he might. That's what keeps him doing it. Now, Pennsylvania or Tennessee just announced, we looked at the state budget and we can't afford to do this anymore. We are closing down the lottery payoffs. Nobody's going to win 28 million. Nobody's going to win 5,000. Nobody's going to win an instant 20 bucks. Nobody wins a dime ever again at all. But if you just like to scratch off numbers, you can for fun. How many people are going to buy lottery tickets? What changed? Before, it likely wasn't going to work, but there was a chance. Now, people realize it's not going to work. And if my little guy or my little girl thinks or knows, if I misbehave, I might get my way. If I throw a tantrum, I might get my way. If I pitch a fit, I might get my way. If it works every once in a while, they will keep doing it. When they know that the lottery is closed down, they'll quit doing it because they realize, it's not going to happen. If you've got I don't know if you've got a historic section in Nashville where you have no parking, like Boston, you know, you get down around the North Church and stuff, it's like no parking there. But if you've got an area like that in Nashville, and I want you to imagine, or in your neighborhood, everybody there knows the parking meter's routine, the parking meter maid routine, or whoever does the tickets. If everybody knows she's not really going to give you a ticket right away, but here's how it's going to go. The sign says no parking. And you and everybody else in town knows that if you park there, you're going to get a little paper on your window that says, please do not park here. And if you don't move the car, after a little while, you get another one that says, we asked you not to park here. And after a little while, you're going to get one that said, I really mean it, do not park here. And then you're going to get one that says, don't make me tell you again. And then you're going to get one that says, I'm starting to count to 10. And then you get a ticket. What would that area look like? You know what that area would look like. Somebody said it would be 1 hour parking, you know, because everybody said that's what you can do. Kids figure that out. So be consistent. Mistake number 10, thinking I don't have time. I used to have a mom, she would call me, and she had an easy child that ended up having some real problems. And then she had a difficult child in her mind. And she always felt there's something wrong with this child. And she would call me, just listen to him. and there's something wrong with him. And she let an animosity build up between her and that child. And I remember one time she said, I don't have time to deal with all of the disobedience. If your child came home from school or camp and they had lice, how many of you would say, well, I don't have time to deal with lice right now? Nobody would do that. Why? Because we understand what about lice? Not dealing with it now not only doesn't make it go away, it's going to get worse. So take the time to deal with it. Child training time is well invested time, and it saves time. All discipline, Hebrews 12 says, all discipline for the moment seems not joyful, but sorrowful. Yet afterwards, it yields a peaceful fruit. And how many of you parents, is you're training your kids now, or if your kids are out of the house, if you can remember back to when sometimes there'd be something starting to get a little askew, an attitude that didn't need to be there, an attitude showing up that was inappropriate or disrespectful and stuff. And you didn't immediately cue in, but then it just starts getting worse. And after a week, you realize, this is getting out of control. And then you start addressing it, and then you deal with it. And then there's the talk, and then there's the punishment, and then there's the apology, and then there's the hug. And when you really dealt with it, now how is that child afterwards? You remember? Now that child was happy. Now that child was secure. Now and it's back to peaceful. And instead of this kind of battling thing going on, it's back to where it's supposed to be. That was well spent time. And if it had been done 3 or 4 or 5 days earlier, you would have had the peace earlier. He who spares his rod hates his son. He who loves him disciplines him diligently. That brings us to number 6. Failing to control self. When I'm not in control of Scott, it does not put me in a good position to try to help my child be in control of themselves. There are people who abuse children. There are people who are in jail and should be in jail. The motivation for discipline is love. What does the text say? He who loves him disciplines him diligently. Now, there may be things that are aggravating. There may be things that are annoying. There may be things that sometimes make us angry. We need to control that anger and maybe have them sit down in a chair until we go and collect ourselves and make sure that we're calm and coming across in the right way and in control of ourselves. But the motivation is to be love. Not because we're embarrassed, not because we're angry, not because something cost us money. The motivation is to be love. Discipline versus abuse. There's a lot of people that will think if you spank your child, you're abusing a child. No, you're not. Loving discipline is not abuse. But I tell you what is, I think, a problem. I was watching a morning program one time. It was, audience talk to a male and a female host, and then they would have a guest. And they had some child expert up there. And he was explaining that you never, ever, spank, use physical discipline on a child. And they'll often use words like hit or different things like that. I'll tell you, one of the reasons sometimes people have a problem with it is because a lot of people didn't grow up with loving discipline. They grew up in a home with an angry alcoholic or abusive father who took things out on the children. And so that's what they associate with. And so that's sometimes why they have that view. But whatever reason, this fellow is buying into the pop psychology of you never, ever do that. And the woman host said, well, I've got a 2-year-old, and she picks up a knife or something sharp, I'll take her little hand and I'll go, no, no. And the expert with this big smile comes, and it's important to know that that's wrong. And then he continues talking, and then start taking questions. And there's a lady in the back, and she says, I got a problem. I'm always yelling and screaming at my kids. And Mr. Expert laughed off. He goes, oh, don't worry about that. I've got a 3 and a 4-year-old. I yell and scream at them too. Put 2 and 2 together right there. You're in a home where you think it's abusive to tell the 2-year-old, no, no. So what do you do when they're doing something they're not supposed to do? No, no. I said, don't do that. Don't make me tell you again. If you can't be a parent and offer some loving discipline to a child, don't be surprised if after a while things are chaotic enough that guess what you're probably going to be doing? You may be yelling and screaming. Now let me tell you, that it can be a really abusive situation. That's mistreating a child. Man, I got a lot of spankings growing up. I was the problem middle child, by the way. But I got a lot of spankings growing up. And I appreciate that my parents did that for me. And I'm so glad they did that instead of yelling and screaming at me. Also, don't do things like this. What's wrong with you? I don't know why you won't do right. Imagine you're a little 6-year-old and your mom or dad has just said that to you. What have you just heard? Number one, you've just heard that you're defective. There's something wrong with you. And number two, the adults don't know what it is or how to fix it. That's not a secure place for a little 6-year-old guy or girl, or 4-year-old, or 5-year-old, or 7-year-old, or 8-year-old. When you're a little kid, you don't know how to drive a car, but mom and dad do. You don't know how to make a casserole, but mom does. You don't know how to fix a bike, dad does. It's the adults that know things. And here they are acting disgusted and angry at you and blaming you for being defective and saying they don't know how to fix it. Never say something like that to a child. And then here's the base test. So the base test is to illustrate, I'm going to need this over here. The base test is to illustrate motive. So in this illustration, we're going to assume that you've got a vase in your house, and it's very valuable. And we're also going to assume, for sake of illustration, you did not prior have a rule, no playing ball in the house. By the way, have the rules in your house that you want to have in your house. When you're in somebody else's house, respect the rules in their house. If you're allowed to have shoes on in your house, that's fine. If you go into somebody else's house and the rule in their house is you don't wear shoes, that's their house. Respect their rules. We got one room in our house. I used to allow bowling. We used to play football in that room. It's a big room. we would play football in there sometimes. But for this illustration, we're going to assume that mom and dad have not previously told, and we're going to call him Jaden. Sorry to any Jadens here, common enough name. We're going to assume Jaden has not been given this rule before. But in that room is your great-grandmother's vase. And you've had it appraised, and it's worth $8,000. And it's up there on the mantle. And Jaden comes in, and he's got a rubber ball, and he throws it off the wall, and he catches it. Remember, in this scenario, there's not a previous rule. And he catches it. He throws it, and he catches it. Mom sees, and she says, Jaden, don't throw the ball in the house. Jaden looks directly at you and throws the ball and catches it. What does mom do next? I'll tell you what some moms do. Nothing got broken, and it's not a big deal, and she goes, Jaden, I asked you not to do that. Jaden, I mean it, you stop that. Jaden, don't make me tell you again. Jaden, I mean it, you better stop that. And he's waiting until her voice gets increase, and maybe finally she comes and takes away the ball. That is not good parenting. But what if she said, Jaden, don't throw the ball in the house. And he looks right at you. And he goes, but it ricochets. And it comes over here. And there goes that $8,000 vase into a bunch of pieces. Now what does mom do? Does she go, Jaden, I asked you not to do that? No, that is not what mom does. What's mom doing now? Oh, Jaden's getting a whooping. Jaden is dead. He's just like, Jaden! She's screaming. I can't believe she snatches him up and everything. Now he's terrified and she's, why? Why is that happening to him? Because she's upset over her $8,000 vase. And you know what? Children are clumsy sometimes. And he might have bumped into that vase accidentally and broke it, and that doesn't mean he should be punished. Or if dad came in, he said, here, Jaden, catch. And Jaden didn't catch it and it hit the vase, dad might be in a bit of trouble for a while, but that's not Jaden's fault. The thing is, this should have been a big deal the very first time. Because there's something in that room that's worth a lot more than $8,000. And that's that little guy. And he heard what you said. He knew you said don't do it, and he looked at you in defiance, and he did it. That is the big deal, right there. That doesn't need to be followed by a bunch of little warnings escalating until mom starts yelling. That was a big deal right there. Everything else needs to stop. And she needs to go over there and she needs to deal with that defiance. She needs to talk to him about it. She needs to talk to him about his heart and the way he's behaving. Remind him of her job as a parent before God to train him not to be like that, because she loves him and she doesn't want him to grow up to be that kind of a person. And he needs to be punished, and that needs to be taken very seriously right there, because that was just outright defiance. Whether or not the vase shattered is a secondary issue. That's not the discipline issue. And so we need to watch why we're disciplining our children. Not out of selfishness, not out of anger, but because we're actually concerned about that child. Here's 3 things that make discipline much more effective. When we are calm, when we are consistent, and when we are in control of ourselves. I had a couple times when one of my kids told me, after they said, Dad, you did that because you were angry. And I was, and they could see that. And that didn't make for effective discipline. Calm, consistent, and in control. Obviously, we're not happy, but get ourselves in control before we start. There's something hypocritical about expecting a child to control themselves if I'm not controlling myself. Number 7, the mistake of training children to disrespect instructions given calmly. I'm going to read that again. Training them to disrespect instructions given calmly. So in this situation, let's say Junior's got school tomorrow, he's got a test tomorrow, and he's over here playing video games. It's okay to play some video games. Don't get too wrapped up in it. Watch out for letting your kids get too wrapped up in it. But in our illustration, there's a number of things that could use tuning up before we get to that one. So he's just playing away. And Mom says, Junior, you need to get to bed. He goes, okay. A few minutes later, Junior, I mean it, you gotta go. All right. A few minutes later, Junior, it's past your bedtime. You gotta go up. All right, just a minute. A few minutes later, Junior, I mean, all right, I'm going. All right, just a minute, next level. And each time it's just going on and on. Then she gets a phone call. And it's something about, her mother-in-law or her aunt or whatever, and she's tied up with talking with her sister, and they're dealing with a whole bunch of problems. And about 45 minutes later, she gets off the phone, and she walks in there, and there he is. And now it's like an hour past time he was supposed to go, and now she loses it. And now she starts yelling and screaming, Junior, you get up right now! And what does he do? He drops the remote and he goes. And then she goes, oh, I don't know why he does that. Okay, let's back up. Why does he do that? Because she has trained him to disrespect instructions given calmly. She didn't intend to. It's just a habit they've gotten into. But that's how he's trained. He knows that when Mom says in a pleasant voice, you need to get up and do this, that he doesn't have to, because she's not yelling yet. She's not screaming yet. She's not mad yet. He knows that he can wait. And so that trains him to only respond once she's really angry. In Nebraska, somebody told me about the little girl that the mother kept calling her. She kept playing, and then the mother employed the middle name, and Mary Elizabeth, come down here. And the aunt said, Mary, why don't you go? And Mary Elizabeth went, she'll call me 3 more times. She knew. Here's what I would recommend. Mom sits down with Junior, and I'd recommend an apology. And say, Junior, I've been yelling at you, and I don't think that's good for you, and I don't think that's the way God wants me to train you. And so, I'm sorry. Do you want me to yell at you? And Junior, because he hasn't learned to say yes, ma'am yet, just goes, or no, ma'am, or he says, He says, would you like me to stop yelling? He goes, sure. And she says, well, I'm going to make it a point to stop yelling at you. And I'm sorry that I have. And we're going to do things differently in the future. I'm going to tell you what you need to do, and I'm going to tell you one time. And then it's your job to do it, not after I'm yelling, but just when I tell you. And if you don't, then you're going to be punished. Now, when she says, I'm not going to yell anymore, Junior's thinking, cool. And then here's this other thing, and I'm going to tell you something. That night when she says, Junior, it's time to get up and go to bed, don't expect that he's going to hop up and go to bed, because Pavlov's dog has been trained for a long time the other way, and it's going to take a little bit to reverse it. But, and Bertina mentioned this, as you heard me make this point, give him a warning. So it's go in there and say, Junior, it's almost time to go to bed. You got 5 more minutes. So if he wants to get that last level, he can make it. He's like, And now he's had his warning as he comes in. Junior, it's time to get up and go to bed. All right, just a minute. Hey, what? Well, come over here, you're going to get a spanking. What? Oh, why? Well, you remember we talked about it? And in his little mind, he's maybe wanting to say, but you weren't yelling, you weren't mad, there was no DEFCON warning. And she says, that's right, we talked about this. I'm not going to yell. I don't want to yell at you. I don't want to scream at you, but I do want you to obey. And she explains it to him, and she gives him a spanking, and he goes to bed. Now, the next night, it may happen again. Maybe the next night it'll happen again, but once he knows the lottery's over, you know what's going to happen? When she says he's going to now be trained to listen to instructions in a calm voice. I went over this one time in a lesson, and it was in somebody's home. And unfortunately, afterwards, there was a little boy playing with a puzzle, and the dad told him, go ahead and put that up now. And he goes, all right, just a minute. And it was the wrong day to do that. But then he found out, no, that's not going to work. It's our choice, really. Do they never obey? Do they obey after you scream? Do they obey only after you say it over and over and over? Or do they obey on the first time and calm instruction without yelling, nagging, badgering? Some of the moms were together today, and I asked them to each give 3-word parenting advice. And there was a lot of good answers. And one of them that I've heard done before in doing that exercise, somebody said, first time obedience. And that's just really, really, really effective. And by the way, this is not the purpose of it. But if you ever see your child start to run out in a road and you see a car coming and you tell them to stop, at that moment, it's going to be a really, really valuable thing if they have learned when mom says stop, you stop. That's not the aim of doing it, because that's hopefully not going to happen. But there's greater spiritual things going on as well. And it's really valuable for that child to learn to respect what mom said. Number 8, the mistake of discouraging and provoking our children to wrath. Colossians chapter 3, Paul said, fathers, provoke not your children that they be not discouraged. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but nurture them in the chastening and admonition of the Lord. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Mothers can provoke children to wrath. But notice who Paul is speaking to in both of these texts. He's speaking to fathers. And I think it's probably fair to assume that it's more often the father that can come across in a way in provoking their children to wrath. There are some people that grow up in a home where you get one of two things from your father: criticism or nothing. And there's probably some people in this audience that grew up in a home where if you did real well at school, your father's not going to tell you he's proud of you or a good job or anything. If you worked extra hard mowing the grass, he's not going to compliment you on it. If you want to, take time to do something with him, he's not going to do it. I had a friend in high school. He had not one, he had 2 Mustangs. He had a more recent Mach 1, this is back in the 70s, and he had a classic 64, 65 Mustang 2+2 fastback. 2, this high school kid had. But he told me, he said, my dad will give me anything I want, but he would never play ball with me. There are some people who grow up in home and dad doesn't have time for them. He's busy and you can be seen and not heard, and he doesn't really want to have anything to do with you unless you mess up. If you got a call from the teacher, now he's got your attention. If when you were mowing the grass, you ran over mom's flowers, now he's got your attention. If you broke something, now he's got your attention. Man, that is not the way children need to be brought up. Children need criticism, as we all do. We all need correction. Correction doesn't end after we're children. What is it saying in 2 Timothy 3 that the word does for us? Instruction, correction. We all need correction, and children need it too. But that's not the only thing. You read the letters of Paul. Does he correct people? Yes, he does. Does he also commend people? Yes, he does. He says to the Thessalonians, he says, we don't even need to tell other people about you because they've already heard about you, how you turned away from idols and turned to serve the living God, and tells them about the good reputation that they have. Children, it's good to commend them. They don't need to have a celebration every time they do a responsibility they're supposed to do, but let them be secure. Don't let them grow up to be arrogant, but let them grow up to have the security of wanting to do right and knowing that mom and dad are on their side and love them and notice it. And when they need correction, give them that. Don't expect talents beyond their capacity. You know, if you wanted your daughter to be an opera singer and she's tone deaf, give up on that expectation. You know, if you wanted your boy to be a middle linebacker and he weighs 98 pounds soaking wet, you know, don't expect that to happen. And the child may have some disabilities of one sort or another. Don't expect what they can't do. But one of the things that I've been impressed by in parents dealing with children that have certain limitations is just the love and the dedication and the care that those parents give, and they realize what that child is not going to be able to do while, you know, expecting and enjoying that child accomplishing what that child can do. Let them progress and do without expecting more than they can do, but be supportive to them. And consistency comes back to this. If you grow up in a home where one day you smart off at mom and dad thinks it's funny, and the next day you spilled the milk and dad's smacking you in the face, that's not a secure place to be. I've heard that people with cattle, electric fences around cattle, after a while I've heard that you can turn off the electricity because the cattle have learned, you know, and so they know where they're secure. But I want you to imagine what it would feel like to be a cow in a field with moving electric fence, and you never know where it is. You know, okay, I think we're safe. You graze for a little bit, zap! We don't want children growing up in an insecure place that like when they know where the lines are, where they know where the boundaries are, where they know where the rules are, there's great strength for the child in that, because there's both the security and joy of knowing where the boundaries are, and also the warning of realizing if I decide to get stupid, I'm going to have some trouble. Number 9, the mistake of failing to parent with joy. It's important to not do wrong things. It's important to have structure and rules. But have you ever been in a home where there's just no joy? You know, it's like maybe dinner's at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, everybody sits down, no elbows on the table. Somebody say grace. Pass the peas. Anybody want to grow up in that? Have joy in your home. Look at all the verses here about joy, and both between the husband and the wife and the children. Proverbs 5, rejoice in the wife of your youth. Be intoxicated in her love. Next, Proverbs 23. The father of the righteous, now getting to the children, will greatly rejoice. He will have joy of him. Let your father and mother be glad. Let her rejoice who gave birth to you. Proverbs 23. Proverbs 15. A joyful heart makes a cheerful face. When the heart is sad, the spirit is broken. A cheerful heart has a continual feast. Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than fattened ox served with hatred. The worthy woman, the law of kindness is on her tongue. In Proverbs 17:22, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And I think maybe I mentioned this, I did this series last week too, so I might sometimes get confused, but I think I mentioned this the other day here, that in parenting groups sometimes I've been asking a question and just asking people to think about what's some fond memory that you have about your mom or dad. And so far, almost all of the answers have been rather simple things. You know, not huge, expensive things. One time, there was one guy remembered a cruise with his dad, but here's why he remembered it. His mom and dad were divorced, and he didn't get to have that much time with his dad. And one time his dad won a cruise for 2, and so got to take his son, and his son got to have that time with his dad. So it wasn't just, oh, a cruise, it was, he got time with dad. But a lot of people, it'd be things just simple things, making cookies with mom, or eating sardines with dad, or just watching something or doing some board game. Simple things. And it hadn't been a lot of, we went to Disney World and spent several $1,000s. One guy did mention a trip out west, but you know what the memory was? He said we got out there in the mountains and there was snow, and he said we stopped and we had a snowball fight. You know, his first time to see snow. You know, have joy in your home. You know, take the time to enjoy your children and let them enjoy each other and the family enjoy being together. One of the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace. Mistake number 10, failing to use the rod and reproof. The proverb says the rod and reproof bring wisdom. What if there's only the rod? You know, what if dad comes in, come over here, whack, straighten up. You walk by, dad goes, whack. What have you learned? Stay away from dad. You know, that's all you've learned. What if there's just reproof? Bertina was at Walmart. That's my wife, Bertina. She was at Walmart one day, and there's this kid just pitching a fit. And he's in the buggy, and he's trying to kick her, and he's screaming at her, I hate you, all this kind of stuff. And I assumed she had read some parenting magazine or something that said, explain your feelings to the child. That's my guess. Because this little guy that's, I hate you. He's in the little sit part of the buggy there. He's trying to kick her and hurt her. And she goes, it doesn't make mommy feel good when you do that. To which he did not say, oh, I beg your pardon, mother dear. If he's trying to kick you, I would say his goal is to make you not feel good. She's reproving him, but there was nothing to back it up. So he just leaned as far forward as he could and got as close to her face as he could and just yelled, shut up! It's not just a rod, it's not just reproof, it's both. And a number of you grew up in a home where if you misbehaved, if you were defiant, if you hit or rebelled, if you disobeyed your mom or dad, you got punished, but before you got punished, you got the lecture. A bunch of you grow up in a home like that? Now I have a question. Did you sometimes wish they would skip the lecture and get right to the spanking, right? Yep. Why? The spanking's gonna hurt here. The lecture hurt here. How would you have felt if your brother had done that to you? Oh, that's gonna hurt you. So can we just skip all this part? Just give me the spanking, let me go. No, there's value in the lecture. If there's not gonna be a spanking coming, then it's like, let me know when you're done talking, I'm just it's both together. And you know what? The anticipation of it, there's this too. If you go to the doctor and he says, got to give you a shot, Scott, okay, then we're done. But if the doctor goes, sorry to tell you, Scott, but I'm going to have to give you a shot. And it's going to hurt. Roll up your sleeve. I hate this part of the job. you might want to hold on to something. You know? It can be the same spanking, but it just kind of boosts it. But you're wanting to get to the heart. Talk to them about it. Let there be some consequence. And the rod and reproof bring wisdom. But a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. There was a story one time, well, we'll get to that later. Actually, the next point's kind of long. I wanted to end sooner tonight, so we're going to do this. We'll start tomorrow morning with settling for situation control instead of training the child. And I'll just say this for now. Proverbs 22 did not say control a child, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. It said train a child, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And we'll talk about the difference of those two things in the morning. Thank you so much for your attention this evening. Visitors, thank you very much for being here. We're going to sing a song of invitation. And if there is something in your life you need to make right, make it. The prodigal son comes back to the father, and the father runs out to see him. And James says, draw nigh to God, he will draw nigh to you. If there's something you need to make right with God, do so. If as we're going through these lessons, you see there's something you need to maybe an apology you need to make to somebody in your family, make that apology and have the hugs and go forward and do so. We all make mistakes. I've made way more than my share. But the blood of Christ is given to us because we need it. And if you need to subject yourself to the blood of Christ, if you're outside of Christ, you can do that by doing what they did on the day of Pentecost and repenting and being baptized in the name of Christ for the remission of your sins. If you need to respond in any way publicly, please do so as we stand and sing.